read 115 books last year, and these are my top 10. I found it so difficult to narrow it down to 10 books, but I did it. They're here, and I'm so happy with what I've chosen. And they're not in any particular order, just in the order that I pulled them off my shelves, except for the very, very last one, which is my favourite book of last year, and potentially my favourite book of all time. If you look in the description, all the chapters are the different books that we're going to be talking about. If there's one in particular that catches your eye, feel free to click that and have a look at that one. I'll tell you a little bit about what they're about and then give you a spoiler-free opinion on each one and why it made it into my top 10. First up, we have When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This is the first book in a new, I think it's going to be a trilogy, and we follow Rave and Khan. Rave is an assassin for the rebellion, and her job is basically to follow orders and make sure she doesn't get caught, which is all well and good until she does and ends up in this jail with this torturer. Then we have Khan, who is kind of mourning the loss of his great love. He is a dragon rider who took the head of a king and donned his crown, and he's on this mission to kind of try and make himself feel better. We don't really understand what it is exactly he's trying to do, but some clues end up taking him to the high security prison where Rave is currently being held, and their paths cross. They end up having to team up together and go on this mission, and along the way they start to get to know each other a little bit better, and they start figuring out that not everything is quite as it seems. Something else has been going on, and they learn some crazy stuff, and they have to try and learn how to deal with that together. Now, I'm really surprised that this ended up in my top 10 because the first 15 chapters, when I say I was so ready to put this down and I had no interest in picking it back up, I had no idea what was going on. I really, really struggled with the world building. I couldn't get into it. And then about chapter 15, I'd say it was about 100 pages in, it was so strange because it was just like this light bulb moment where everything clicked, and suddenly I was so invested and I was so kind of like attached to what was going on, and everything suddenly made sense. I'm dying to reread this because I feel like those first 15 chapters are going to hit so differently now that I know how the storyline of the book goes. I do wish, I think my only caveat is that maybe Sarah had made the world building a little bit more accessible, because I feel like a lot of people are going to feel the same way that I did in the early chapters of this book and not stick it out. The only reason I did is because I really struggled to DNF books. And then that makes me, like, so many people are going to miss out on such a great book because they can't get past those initial pages, which is totally fair. And yeah, it's the only thing that lets it down. But I promise, guys, it's worth pushing through. It is worth the read, and I am counting down the days to the sequel. I'm so excited. Then we have Lucy Undying by Kiersten White. I'm gonna let you guys know right now, I have no notes on this book. This book was perfection. In this book, we get an alternative story for Lucy Westenra, who, for those of you who have read Bram Stoker's Dracula or know anything about Bram Stoker's Dracula, will know that she was kind of the socialite who was kind of playing three guys at the same time. She was a bit of a rich, spoiled girl, and honestly, a character that was a product of her times, written by a misogynist who was a product of his time. Kiersten takes Lucy's story and goes, what if everything we thought Lucy was and did was wrong, and there was something else going on, something much more sinister going on, and that is the POV we get. It runs across multiple timelines. We get 3 different versions of Lucy's POV in this from different points in her life. And then we also get a modern POV from Iris, who is the other character we follow. Iris is the daughter of a woman who is the head of like this Church of Scientology style cult / MLM that somehow involves vampires, but we don't really know what's going on there. But their paths cross and they kind of start working together to try and, like, both of them solve the issues of their past and try and fix things. It's gothic, it's immersive, it's sapphic, which I absolutely loved, and I love the way that this can be read without taking away from the original things about Dracula's story that I loved, because both books can kind of be true at the same time. It's just like you've taken the character and you just have like this, almost you're looking through somebody else's eyes, and I absolutely love that. And this is the Lucy that I will know love for the rest of my life. Then we have Let's Split Up by Bill Wood. This is kind of a Scooby-Doo slash Scream slash Pretty Little Liars inspired YA horror. I would definitely say it's on the younger side of YA, so think kind of ages 12 to 16 are probably going to enjoy this most, but I really love reading books in that age gap, and this one really stuck with me for so many different reasons. I was so lucky to get an incredibly early arc of this book. I became quite friendly with the author after he announced his book, and reading the story was just brilliant. As a woman in her 30s, it was so nostalgic. It just felt like I had been transported back to that time when I was a kid, and I just really, really enjoyed it. It's super fun. It's got this kind of silly vibe where the book isn't taking itself too seriously, which I absolutely loved. And it has a sequel coming out in, I think it's October, which I'm so excited for. If you enjoy a YA thriller horror and you don't mind that younger age group kind of that it's aimed at, then you're really, really going to enjoy this. It's just a really good, fun palate cleanser style book. It basically follows a bunch of kids in a small American town, and some of their classmates get unalived, and they are trying to solve the mystery because their sheriff, deputy, whatever he's called, is useless and has no interest in actually trying to solve the crime. And we spend the entire time trying to figure out if it's supernatural or not. It has those elements of that kind of mystery gang style from Scooby-Doo, but then it has these kind of creepy home invasion moments that remind you of like that Scream-esque style TV show or movie, and you're trying to just get in everybody's head and figure out what's going on. And I loved it. Then we have A Fate Forged in Fire by Hazel McBride. This actually doesn't come out till May, and I read it in December. This one is going to be huge, guys. This is going to be massive when it comes out. It is dragons, it's Celtic, it's feminist, it's got this kind of matriarch war going on, and it's just incredible. And the opening line is so incredibly good. Like, I'm gonna put it up here because it's just one of my favorite opening lines ever in a book. Hazel has completely floored me with this. I am so sad that I'm gonna have to wait so long for the next book, but yeah, you need to be getting this one on your TBR. Then we have Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I discovered, by the way, it's all 3 books. There's 3 books in this series, and all 3 books should be in this top 10, but I'm just taking the first book as an example. This was incredible. Fredrik's writing style is so unlike anything I've ever kind of read. It's described as psychological fiction, and it's incredible. It's so good. It follows so many different characters. I remember when I first picked it up and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to keep up with all of these people? But he's so good at giving each of those individual characters a voice and a tone and a style that you don't even need to name them when it switches to their POV, because you go from one paragraph to another where it changes characters and you just instantly know who's speaking just in the way that it's written. It's an incredibly sad and complex story, and it's very much, I can see that kind of psychological factor, because he's almost studying like this town where something really tragic happens, and then you get this kind of mentality of like how people respond to that and how they're going to react to that. And it just, I devoured it. He has instantly become one of my auto-buy authors, and I cannot wait to read the rest of his backlog. Then we have Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. This is the 5th book in the series, but the 3rd and final book from Magnolia's point of view. If you follow me on any other channels, you will know that I am a huge Magnolia Parks fan. I think it is one of the most misunderstood book series in the bookish community. I absolutely love Jessa's writing. I love how she writes characters, and I love the way that this story is just so honest and so open and raw and realistic. However, saying that, reading through these books, I never quite clicked with Magnolia. I was always a Daisy girl. Daisy hates the other main female character in this series. And Magnolia, whilst I could feel for her and I did like her, I didn't connect with her until this book. We get to this and it's massively about grief and healing and kind of moving on and support. And I was just in Magnolia's head and I was like, oh my God, girl, I get it. Like, I just understood her so completely that I finally clicked with her, and I was like, had this connection with this character that just made me feel sad and happy and all of the emotions, every emotion across the spectrum. I just felt that for and with Magnolia. I think, like I said before, Magnolia Parks as a series is so incredibly underrated. A lot of people will reduce it down to, you know, oh, it's a bit like Gossip Girl, or it's a bit like Made in Chelsea. And I feel like I understand why people compare it to that. I can see the similarities, but I feel like it ends in the fact that it surrounds rich, privileged kids. We have gang members, that kind of thing. But Jessa's kind of story, to me, specifically with this series, is very much, she writes about the human experience, and it can apply to anybody no matter what your position is, and why we do certain things and how we form trauma bonds and why we do that, and how important these people are to us that we cross path with in our lives, and how do we choose when to give up and when to push on. And she writes dialogue like no other author I've ever read. Like, the conversations between the characters just get me every single time, and I will forever, ever defend this series. Then we have The Light That Blinds Us by Andy, Darcy, Theo. This is an incredible YA debut that is elemental magic in a modern world, and I just loved it. It's got this really good kind of rep of mental health, a lot of different things going on all at once, and I just devoured it. If you were a fan of books like kind of The Maze Runner or Percy Jackson, then you're going to love something like this. Again, I would say it's ever so slightly on the kind of younger to mid YA. So I would say maybe 14 to 17 is like the ideal age group for this book. But again, I am a person who enjoys reading books in that category. This is the first in a series. Each one is going to end up sharing different POVs aside from the main character, Alexis. And I believe the next one is Blaze's POV. Each character has a different elemental magic. So Alexis is water and Blaze is fire. And I'm so excited. Then we have Phantasma by Kaylie Smith. This was sent to me as an ARC as well. And guys, I loved this one. This is a dark romantasy, which I must admit is not usually my thing. However, if you were a fan of books like Caravel or movies like Casper the Friendly Ghost, but wished that they were for adults and they were spicy and they were dark, then you're gonna love this book. It's a book that involves a game very similar in that style of Caravel, in terms of like, nobody really knows what happens when you're in there, and it's all a little bit of a superstitious myth. And she finds out, our main character, Ophelia, finds out that her sister has entered the game of Phantasma, and she's like, oh my God, what are you doing? And she basically goes in. Ophelia is a necromancer. She has newly come into and inherited her powers. And she's like, what do I do? Anyway, she gets into the game. She is separated from her sister, and there is a phantom called Blackwell who offers to help her. Blackwell is incredible. If you were that kid whose first crush was Casper the Friendly Ghost when he turned into a real boy in the original live action movie, you are going to enjoy this book. Because Blackwell is basically a very adult and very schmexy Casper the Friendly Ghost. There are some delicious spicy scenes in this, as well as a heck of a lot of tension, but it doesn't take away from the plot. The plot is so good. It's I had devoured it. The second book, Enchantra, comes out in a couple of months as well, which I think is the sister's story, and I'm so excited for that. Then we have The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang, and this was incredible. One of the most incredible things I've ever read. It's, again, elemental magic, but imagine kind of Airbender meets Japanese military war stories, and that is what you get with The Sword of Kaigen. It's incredibly devastating, it's complex, it's extremely heartbreaking. Like, the entire time I was reading this, I just wanted to pull the characters out of the book and bring them home and keep them warm and keep them safe. And this book will break your heart. It focuses very much on a family relationship. So you have a mother, a son, a father, and they've all got different things going on that are kind of like they're trying to deal with internally without letting everybody else know. And at the same time, they are in this kind of place where they are being dictated to. Think of kind of North Korea, where they are being told what is true and they have no way of kind of debunking it. And then war comes to them and they're having to defend themselves and defend everyone else. And how do you do that while trying to stay loyal to a country that you feel like you were supposed to stay loyal to, but then figuring out all of these truths along the way? It's very dark, it's very political, and it's very, very, very sad. And at the heart of it, even though all of those things still apply, at the heart of it, it is about family and family ties and how to trust each other and where that line is between blind loyalty and choosing family. And I just think M.L. Wang did such a great job, and it was incredible. And that finally brings me to my favourite book of the year, which is also probably my favourite book of all time. And it is again M.L. Wang, but this time we are talking about Blood over Bright Haven. Now, I actually read Blood over Bright Haven before I read Sword of Kaigen because I got an arc for this. This is how I got introduced to the author. And it follows Siona, who in her world is the first female to ever be admitted into the High Magistry University to become a High Mage. She's dealing with a lot of stuff along the way. There's a lot of sexism and there is a lot of kind of inherent misogyny, as well as a lot of racism going on in there, and some really horrible things happen. As a kind of insult, she gets paired off with a janitor as her research assistant, and she doesn't want to kind of show her embarrassment. So she's just like, fine, I can do this better than you anyway, and accepts him and takes him. And then she starts to see a different side of the world that she's been living in, and she starts to find out that not everything is quite as it seems. This is one of the most devastating kind of stories I've ever read. Ever. The first chapter alone is insanely graphic and heartbreaking, and like, it feels like the first chapter is one of those chapters that feels like the end of the book rather than the start of the book, and you're like, oh dear, like, where is this going to go? It is about repression and genocide and this quest for truth. The magic system in it is incredibly unique. I've never read anything else like it. It kind of combines this kind of engineering with computers, with science, with magic, and it was just so well executed. I've never read anything like it, but I had no problems understanding it. And this book should just go on everybody's list. You honestly won't regret it, and I just think it's one of the best books ever written, and I will be surprised if this gets topped anytime soon. It is technically a standalone, however, with the ending, it is open for there to be more books, or at least one other book, and there's a secret part of me that is hoping that that's exactly what we will get from M.L. Wang, is that she is not quite done with this world yet. But as it stands at the moment, it is a standalone. All in all, there were so many other great books that I read last year, but those were the ones that I still kind of think about on a daily basis, that whether that's because I'm looking forward to sequels or there was just some kind of message in there that really stood out to me. I just had such a good year. I have no idea how this year is going to top it. But let me know what your favourite book of 2024 was, and I will see you all again very, very soon.